Well, Representative Jeffries, I want to thank you so much for joining me here on Spolitics. And I'm going to start the podcast with a question I ask every guest that appears, and that is, name an athlete or a moment that made you love sports.
Well, it's great to be with you, and thank you for everything and that you do, sports and politics. And probably I should say appropriately, what up, though?
Well, look at you. Okay. Somebody gave you some inside intel. All right. That's our Detroit greeting, which, as I often say, can be a question or just a statement.
But yeah, I think I grew up, as you know, I rock with the Yankees, the Knicks, the Jets, St. John's, and the Rangers. So really the first time that one of those teams that I rock with had a championship run at an age that I could appreciate, right? I was 3 years old the last time the Knicks won the championship. I didn't remember it in 1973. But when I was 7, I was following baseball at the time, was beginning to play Little League. And that was the time that the Yankees and the Dodgers were in the first of 2 back-to-back World Series appearances. And of course, famously, so I'm a Yankees fan, watching the World Series. It's great. I remember being in the living room in the apartment that we lived in. My dad was there. My grandfather, Papa Gomes, was there. He lived in LA, so he was actually a Dodgers fan. And Game 6, Reggie Jackson, 3 home runs on 3 consecutive pitches. I think that's the date that we actually won the World Series. But that was, of course, a magical moment in baseball history and sports history. And certainly that's what got me hooked.
Well, it's so ironic. Well, maybe ironic is not the right word, but it's the timing is impeccable that we are recording this podcast on the day that I guess if you wanted to consider it a sport, the Elon Musk versus Donald Trump back and forth that's taking place on social media. But before I get to that, there are pressing Knicks matters that I need to address with you first. This week, the Knicks decided to fire Tom Thibodeau. What did you think about them making this move, doing this just 3 days after the Knicks were ousted from the Eastern Conference Finals?
It definitely caught me off guard, and I think it caught a lot of people off guard at home in New York and Knicks fans. He had a great run, I think 5 seasons. 4 of those seasons we were in the playoffs. Of course, back-to-back 50-win games, most successful series of runs in terms of season after season after season since the glory days for me in the 90s into the early parts of 2000. First appearance, of course, in 25 years in the Eastern Conference Finals. And it's a lovable team. So that was shocking for me, certainly, and for a lot of folks. The question, I think, moving forward is, had the team maxed out under Tibbs' leadership? And clearly there were adjustments that needed to be made that weren't necessarily made, right? The starting 5 played more minutes than any other starting 5 in the entire season. That can't continue. And there was no development of the bench during the season. You can't develop a bench in Game 4, Game 5, or Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals. That's not going to work. So the question, I think, moving forward, because what's done is done, and I think reasonable people could conclude that the Knicks did max out under Tibbs' leadership, notwithstanding, the greatness of the run up until this point and all the excitement. And that when the Knicks are on fire, the city is on fire. And it was a great run. But I think the question here is this our Mark Jackson moment, Steve Kerr moment? Because the firing of Mark Jackson caught a lot of us by surprise. He had 3 successful years, if I recall correctly. But the Warriors concluded that the team had maxed out and decided to go in a different direction. And they obviously found the right person who went on, to lead the team to, I think, 4 different championships as it relates to the Golden State Warriors. So hopefully we can just hit the jackpot in terms of whatever direction we go in next. And this current management has had a pretty successful track record in building the team up until this point.
So would you consider, and by the way, that's a very optimistic way to look at it. I do think there may have been some concern among Knicks fans, and certainly just me as an outside observer, is that typically, we don't know yet the details of how much James Dolan was involved, but it's his team. So of course he was involved, but he has made some rash decisions before, and people have wondered, what was this, another rash decision, or is this something like a little bit more calculated, kind of what you were talking about when you just max out with a particular coach and you need somebody, a new voice in the locker room. That being said, how would you characterize this season for the Knicks as successful?
Yes, I would characterize it as successful. I think because we got the third seed and we're lined up against the world champion Boston Celtics, most people were of the view that we ain't getting out of the second round. Mm-hmm. And this is going to be the third consecutive year that we went out in the second round. Very disappointing. I think we lost to Miami, then we lost to Indiana last year. And the expectation was Boston was going to run us out the gym. Mm. And we win game one. Then we win game two. That was incredible. And then the Celtics come to the Garden, they win game three. And then we do our thing in game four. Had it won, even before Tatum went out. And certainly our prayers are with Tatum for a full and speedy recovery. But it was a great series. And then we smoked the Celtics in game six. At that point, I think for me, of course, a run to winning it all in the finals would have been ideal, but a competitive series, showing some heart, going out, in six is respectable. I think that's a very successful season, but game one was rough. I was in Washington, had it on in the backdrop. We were actually debating the GOP tax scam, and it was kind of late at night, early in the morning, preparing to speak on the House floor, and I couldn't believe that it was falling apart in the last few minutes, and that was unfortunate. And that may have been the point where the Knicks management concluded, it's time to move in a different direction.
Well, I'm a Pistons fan, so I was hating. I'm not gonna lie. We lost all our home games to you all by a combined 6 points, and that was tough. And of course, as fate would have it, over the course of the next week following that series, I spent a lot of time in New York doing some CNN stuff. So I had to have the New York fandom in my face after a salty, tough series. So after that, I have to say I was a bit bitter toward the Knicks.
No, I got you on that. Needless to say, I'm not rocking with Indiana in the finals. Go OKC.
Okay, so it's not like the enemy of my friend, whatever, however that phrase,
no,
or it is more like that, right?
I'm not feeling the Indiana Pacers. Actually, I think this is the most heated Knicks rivalry, and by my calculation, I may be missing something here. The Knicks have now been eliminated by the Pacers 4 consecutive times in series that we've played each other, right?
Yep, that is correct. The only other team that, of course, people would bring up is Miami, but I do think that Indiana, there's a certain track record there, and especially sometimes the way you lose. And of course, you had to deal with Tyrese Halliburton, redoing the Reggie choke. So I know it's bad blood.
That's right. And there's continuity to it, right? Because we're talking about 3 different generations of Knicks teams that have gone to war with the Pacers, right? The Ewing, Starks, Oakley teams of the 90s went to war with the Pacers of Reggie Miller. And, that was a back and forth rivalry. We'd win, they'd win. It was heated. Then the Carmelo team, as you recall, actually when we hoped we would get to the Eastern Conference Finals to play the LeBron Miami Heat team, we got knocked out by Paul George and that version of the Indiana Pacers. I think that was in 2013, maybe 2013. And then this version, the Jalen Brunson Knicks, Big Bodega Knicks, has gotten knocked out by the Pacers. So this is a sustained rivalry. And we're going to have to get on the right side of it next year.
Yeah, I can definitely understand why there would be no love lost and why you'd be actively rooting against the Pacers. Speaking of nemesis, or is it nemesis? I'm not sure. But at any rate, speaking of nemesis, As I mentioned at the top of our conversation, right now, in real time, there is a back and forth playing out between Elon Musk and Donald Trump over social media because, of course, it's 2025, and with these two individuals in particular. Now, the last tweet that Elon Musk, or one of the last tweets he dropped, was that, yeah, that's right, Donald Trump, you were in the Epstein files. Okay. All right. So with this entire back and forth, given all the things that are happening in this country, from the disastrous bill that you just mentioned, what is your perspective of this fight that is going on between Donald Trump and Elon Musk?
Yeah, it's definitely an intense situation. And of course, people on the Hill are following it. I'm in Washington, D.C. right now. People are following it with great interest. It has my colleagues on the Republican side shook right now because you got Donald Trump, who's one puppet master for them, and Elon Musk, who's the other puppet master for them. And they don't know whose side to be on in this fight. So they're kind of burying their heads in the sand largely. What's interesting to me is that Elon Musk's assessment of the GOP tax scam, what we believe is one big ugly bill, is correct when he calls it a disgusting abomination. It is. Now, our view is that it's a disgusting abomination, one, because it takes healthcare away literally from more than 15 million people, the largest cut to healthcare in American history. That's out of control. And then they're ripping food out of the mouths of children and veterans and seniors, largest cut to nutritional assistance in American history. That's ridiculous. And this is all being done in order to provide their billionaire donors with a massive tax break that would be the largest tax break for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected in American history. And then on top of that, they want our children, our grandchildren, the next generation of Americans to pay the bill because they would stick us with more than $3 trillion in additional debt and explode the deficit. And so Elon Musk has said Republicans should be ashamed of themselves for voting for this bill. I agree with that position. Now, the fact that this is broken out into the public domain on social media in such an extraordinary way, and now it's been personalized like this, I think has caught a lot of people off guard. I mean, when I saw that Epstein tweet or post, I'm like, whoa, he just went Tupac, hit him up. I mean, he just went there, and I rock with Biggie, right? But hit him up was like a next level in terms of just a personal assault, and that's basically what Elon has done. And once you cross that, the Rubicon, I'm not sure how the two of them come back from it, and of course, it continues to intensify throughout the day.
I think just based off, of course, on social media, there's a lot of jokes flying around. But beneath all that, I think there is, because we have seen just so much chaos in this administration since they took over in January, that there's a part of the public that is wondering, what is this distracting us from? There's always sort of a watch what a hook is coming with this administration. And so from a strategy standpoint, is this something that is useful for the Democrats, seeing two kind of not likable people go at it in this way?
Yeah, it's interesting because you're absolutely correct. We've seen from this administration from day one a flooding of the zone, the daily outrage, the parade of horribles. And a lot of it is designed to create confusion and to disillusion people, to project this sense that it's all inevitable and that it's hard to follow, what you should be outraged about, because there's so much that takes place that clearly part of the strategy is to try to distract you from the things that you really should be concerned about in any given situation. I think this is different because the feud exploded onto social media based on Elon's criticism of the one big ugly bill and his criticism of the Republicans for trying to jam this down the throats of the American people. Some of the reasons why he disagrees with the bill are reasons why we as Democrats disagree with the bill. The attack on the effort to try to build a clean energy economy. He obviously has a problem with it. He's got business interests connected to that. We have a problem with it because we think standing up a clean energy economy actually will lower energy costs for everyday Americans, and we have to be focused on building an affordable economy, and that's part of the effort to do that. It also creates jobs in places all across the country, and it does something meaningful to address the climate crisis with, the fierce urgency of now that's necessary. So the fact that this feud, the genesis of it, relates to Elon Musk's effort to try to kill the bill, as he said, we agree. Every single House Democrat was strongly opposed to the GOP tax scam. We're working hard to kill the bill as we speak. It limped out of the House of Representatives barely by one vote, and it doesn't have a clear path towards success in the Senate. So it's interesting. I don't think this is a distraction, because what they would be trying to distract you from, meaning Trump, is what they're trying to do in taking away healthcare, taking away nutritional assistance, hurting veterans, hurting everyday Americans to reward their billionaire donors. They don't want us talking about that, but at the center of this fight, or at least how it began, was the criticism around the GOP tax scam and this reckless Republican budget.
Well, let's talk about the tax scam bill, or I did see, I think Chuck Schumer called it the "Well, Everybody's Going to Die" Act, after Congresswoman Joni Ernst, who had some very callous comments about the damage that this bill could do to the people who would lose health care. You know, at this point, I think a lot of people have obviously been very critical of the Democratic Party in this moment, even though you all are not in leadership. You don't have the majority in either chamber. But nevertheless, you are expected to do something. And I'm looking at the approval rate that you all have, and I know you've seen the poll about what the Democratic Party's approval rating has been. Despite all the chaos, despite the fact that Trump's approval ratings are falling, the fact that people are losing a lot of whatever faith they had in that he could fix this economy, is that honeymoon period is over. Like, nobody's kind of buying that he's going to be able to fix this economy. With all that being said, how is it that Democrats can better control this narrative in this chaotic moment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a work in progress for a wide variety of reasons. First of all, people are understandably disappointed and distressed, and in many cases disillusioned by the fact that we lost in November of 2024, and we've got to own that, because we lost to this guy. And obviously, Kamala Harris, in my view, did a tremendous job in the limited time that she had, a 107-day campaign, the best that she could under difficult circumstances, after President Biden decided that he wasn't going to seek re-election. And those circumstances, led to a situation where we lost to Donald Trump. We didn't get the House back. We fell just 3 seats short. And then, of course, lost control of the Senate. So from the standpoint of Democrats in this country being disappointed with the party, that's understandable. And so what we have to do to earn back their trust, one, is to demonstrate that we are functioning as a principled opposition to stop as many bad things from happening as we can, and pushing back aggressively against the parade of horribles that Donald Trump is unleashing on the American people, because this is an unprecedented assault on the economy, an assault on healthcare, an assault on Social Security, an assault on a democratic way of life, an assault on the rule of law, and an assault on democracy itself. So it does require us to engage in an all-hands-on-deck effort. Now, I do think that what we have seen is some success in clarifying for the American people, as you pointed out, Jemele, that Donald Trump promised he was going to fix the economy, address inflation, and lower costs. In fact, he said he was going to lower costs on day one. Dude was lying to the American people. He's not lowering costs. Costs are going up. He's crashing the economy. These Trump tariffs are going to add thousands of dollars in additional expense to hardworking American taxpayers, and he's probably driving us toward a recession. And despite the fact that the expectation was Donald Trump was going to be able to control the narrative, Republicans have complete control in Washington. He's got all these social media relationships and new media relationships, and Democrats would not be able to break through with any degree of clarity. Well, actually, Donald Trump was the most unpopular president at the 100-day mark in modern American history. Somebody's paying attention to the things that are being said. The American people are locking in on the fact that he's actually not making life better for them. He's making life worse. So we have to continue to be the principled opposition, stopping bad things from happening, and I think pivot to articulating our vision for making life better for the American people, that we're committed to building an affordable economy. We know the deck has been stacked against everyday Americans for far too long. The system has been broken for decades. And we have to earn the confidence of the American people that we're committed to fixing it, to improving their lives, and to be very clear to the American people that we hear you, we see you, we feel you, and we're committed to making life better for you.
How can you be principled opposition against an unprincipled enemy?
We're in a more is more environment. So I think the key is, and we can learn from those upon whose shoulders we stand. I had the great honor of serving in Congress with John Lewis, an American hero, who, of course, always inspired us to show up and stand up and speak up. And when you see something that's wrong, never give up, never give in, get into some good trouble, necessary trouble, as he would tell us. He was principled in his opposition, but strong. And throughout his life, particularly in the Jim Crow South, I mean, Donald Trump was battling, John Lewis was battling an authoritarian situation that existed, racial oppression enforced by violence in parts of the Jim Crow South. And yet they were able to both balance that principled opposition with the righteous indignation and the ferocity that was necessary to turn the situation around. And I think for us, that's what we have to do. We have to stretch. We're in a more is more environment, meaning more rallies, more press conferences, more speeches on the House floor, more speeches on the Senate floor, all-night committee hearings, making sure that we're having town hall meetings in Democratic districts, town hall meetings in Republican districts, as we're doing, convening Democratic-led hearings on Capitol Hill, which we've done, Democratic-led hearings across the country, and taking our efforts on the road, which we're continuing to do, sit-ins and a variety of things, site visits. More is more. That's going to be necessary for us to continue to meet the moment.
I've heard you use that terminology about flooding the zone, not in relationship to Donald Trump, but what you think Democrats should be doing, being on TV more, as you just mentioned, hitting essentially the campaign trail, doing the rallies. People look at the rallies that, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did, AOC and Bernie Sanders, and those seem to be very successful. But you and I both know, especially in a time where social media is this prominent, America loves a good marketing campaign. That much was very clear. And what was interesting to me in watching the election was that in so many states, you had people approving very popular Democratic policies that you all were the leaders on, that you all, used to try to reshape this country, and yet still voted for Republicans that were against everything that you were trying to do. So how do you feel like in this time, considering how Republicans have been able to use social media to their benefit, a lot through disinformation, to be honest, and misinformation, but nevertheless, they're still able to control so much of the narrative. So how now, with the election fresh behind you, just for, just 6 months or so,
yeah,
how are you going to make that connection between the marketing the Democratic successes and what you're talking about better so that people really can effectively see what you're doing? Like, what were the lessons learned from the election in terms of how you need to better connect with the American people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that what's important for all of us to internalize is that governing is one lane and communicating with the American people is a different lane. And they require two different types of skills. And the challenge that we have traditionally faced as Democrats in terms of communicating is that Republicans tend to communicate in headlines and Democrats communicate in fine print.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a reason why Democrats sometimes default to fine print. It's because in order to govern, you actually have to master the fine print. And as Democrats, we care about governing because we care about the American people and we care about getting things done. And when you look at the modern day Democratic Party, which really dates back to the presidency of FDR, and think about the things that we've worked hard to deliver to the American people: Social Security, rural electrification, the GI Bill, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, the Higher Education Act, the Elementary and Secondary School Act, Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, the Affordable Care Act, the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the PACT Act, and standing up for our veterans, and then, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, which helped to lower the high price of life-saving prescription drugs, amongst doing other things, including the largest investment in combating the climate crisis in the history of the world. All of these things were brought to you by your friendly neighborhood Democratic Party. That's an amazing track record of success. Of course, much more needs to be done on behalf of the American people, particularly in terms of building an affordable economy and addressing the inflationary crisis that we are dealing with in this country. But that's a great track record of success to build upon. You don't produce all of those things unless you have committed to mastering the fine print of governing. But the challenge for us is that while you govern in fine print, you message, you persuade, you communicate in headlines, particularly in the era of social media and new media. And we just have to do a better job of making sure that we do what we need to do in the communications lane so that the American people actually give us the opportunity in the governing lane to build upon the progress that we've tried to make for everyday Americans over the last 75, 80 plus years.
I look at it as you all are the party of policy and they're the party of personality. And to be honest, a lot of times it feels like the personality part wins out just because of that communication gap that you're talking about. With that being said, again, given how people feel so frustrated right now with the party, how much do you think the criticisms of the party, what do you think is fair criticism of the Democratic Party, and what do you think is unfair?
Well, I think it's fair that at the end of the day, notwithstanding all of the things that were accomplished under the prior administration, that there were a lot of Americans who believed that Donald Trump was better positioned to deal with inflation and to lower the high cost of living in the United States of America. And we did not do a good enough job overall as a party in communicating that, one, we understand that the cost of living is too high, that we actually have a plan to lower housing costs, lower grocery costs, lower energy costs, lower childcare costs, and lower insurance costs, and that we do actually believe with every fiber in our body that in the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, no one should be living paycheck to paycheck. No one should be struggling when they work hard and play by the rules, but yet can't find a good paying job or purchase a home or live a comfortable life or have access to health care, go on vacation every now and then, or be able to retire with grace and dignity. Everybody should have that opportunity in this country, but everybody does not. And I think that we have to do a better job of connecting how we actually feel with making sure that the American people feel us in terms of our commitment to making their lives better. So that, we just need to do better in that area. And I think the other thing we've got to do is convince a greater number of Americans that we actually are fighting for them. Because there's no circumstance where the Republican Party under Donald Trump, who is all about the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. I mean, if you just looked at the inauguration, who was there? It wasn't everyday Americans. It wasn't working class Americans. It was the Billionaire Boys Club. It was like a supervillain convention. And it was wild. And this is who he chose to surround himself with, because this is who he's fighting for. But yet, Donald Trump has somehow managed to convince a significant number of Americans, or at least he did, in connection with the election. As you pointed out, Jemele, he's falling apart right now in terms of the perception that the American people have as it relates to his ability to actually deal with the economy. He lied. He's not focused on lowering costs, but he did manage to convince a significant number of people that he would do that in connection with the election. So we have to do a better job there. Now, in terms of the concern that Democrats on Capitol Hill and the House and the Senate aren't fighting and pushing back against Donald Trump and the administration aggressively, I think, no, every single House Democrat and every single Senate Democrat is working hard to do the best that they can to aggressively push back at what we all believe is an unprecedented situation. And that's why, I've acknowledged that all of us are going to continue to be called upon to do more, to engage with a level of intensity previously unseen at any time in a Congress in modern American history. And it requires extraordinary things to be done, including, but not limited to, what our brother Cory Booker did when he delivered that historical speech on the floor of the Senate. They're trying to cancel our history. He canceled Strom Thurmond.
Representative Jeffries, you mentioned the intensity. And I think that is where a lot of people I talk to just in everyday life, and that's the part that I think has people the most frustrated. I don't think people doubt the effort. I think at this point, people want to know, what are the Democrats actually willing to do? And I say that because we see Trump defying court orders. We see him, people are wondering, yes, you can fight this battle through the courts, but if he don't care what they say, where does that leave you? So I think this idea that you all aren't doing enough is coming from the fact that we don't know what the next level of accountability actually looks like. So can you explain, if he is ignoring these court orders, he's not following the rules, his administration isn't following it, what is the next level of accountability that you have available?
Well, there's a couple of things, right? So you've got congressional accountability, and ultimately the clearest path to bring that about is to make sure that Democrats get the gavels back in November of 2026, that we take the House back, take the Senate back, that we can end this national nightmare legislatively. But
that's a long way from now, though.
I'm just saying, that's in terms of congressional accountability. We got to be real. Why? Because unless a handful of Republicans in the House or a handful of Republicans in the Senate decide to actually grow a spine and stop acting like rubber stamps for Donald Trump's extreme agenda and engaging in their cult-like behavior, then it's going to be hard to get actual accountability on a sustained basis at the congressional level until we defeat the MAGA extremists. next year in the midterm elections. That's not to say there aren't important elections that are already taking place. Every single special election that's been a high-profile race since the Trump presidency, Democrats have won, including but not limited to the race in Wisconsin for the state Supreme Court seat that was expected to be hotly contested. Elon Musk spent $20 or $25 million trying to elect the conservative candidate. The progressive candidate won by 11 points. But that's not the only high-profile special election that we've won. We've won others, and you'll have governor's races that will be important in New Jersey and in Virginia in November. Now, that's not to say that we can't use the levels of authority and capacity that we have as members of Congress, even if the Republicans continue to be sycophants, and we continue to do that as it relates to our engagement in committees, our engagement on the House floor, our engagement across the country. Republicans refuse to have town hall meetings. And so we decided, you know what, we're going to have town hall meetings in your districts to engage with your constituents, to tell them what you are trying to hide, particularly as it relates to ripping healthcare and Medicaid from tens of millions of Americans, closing hospitals, shutting down nursing homes, and creating a situation where people are actually going to die because healthcare is being ripped away from them, and care in terms of these institutions is being ripped away from them. So I think, again, we're in a more is more environment. We just have to continue to do more. Now, on the court side of things, right, it is important to recognize we got three branches of government. We all learn that in social studies as we have come up. And you've got the legislative branch, you've got the executive branch, and you've got the judicial branch. And we have seen an unprecedented number of lawsuits that have filed. Last time I checked, because we work closely with a variety of different groups, civil rights groups, democracy protection groups, organized labor, civil liberties groups, Democratic attorney generals. More than 250 lawsuits have been filed against the Trump administration and the unconstitutional and unlawful executive orders. And I believe it's more than 185 different court orders have been issued halting these executive actions and orders. Now, it has been the case, literally, in a handful of instances, all that just happened to relate to the immigration space, where Donald Trump is pushing the envelope aggressively as it relates to defiance. And in those cases, handful of cases, every single one of them in the immigration space related to deportations or potential deportations, where our view is that the courts need to be more aggressive in asserting its authority if they've concluded that the Trump administration is not complying with a court directive. And what they have available to them is both civil contempt. They can fine the heck out of whoever is not complying, or criminal contempt. And I think the courts have generally been reluctant to use those tools against a sitting administration, but extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And if we see non-compliance continue in different ways, then I think the courts are going to have to get more aggressive. But it's important for all your people to understand that in the overwhelming majority of cases, Donald Trump ain't winning, he's losing. And he's been forced to back down repeatedly.
I guess when you look at also the intimidation that judges are facing now, I think people probably feel a little less hopeful about that, just because of how this administration has gone after judges and called them activists, just because judges they appointed, the judges that he appointed, they have put a bullseye on their back. You mentioned before about how really ultimately, when it comes to the congressional accountability, it's going to require Republicans who know better and theoretically should do better to have a spine, which is something they haven't shown. So I'm wondering from you, what do Republicans say to you privately that they won't say publicly?
Well, a lot of them acknowledge that privately, that some of the things that Donald Trump and his administration are doing are out of control. And then our response, of course, to them is, well, why don't you step up and communicate that either directly to your colleagues in the administration or forcefully, publicly when necessary? And of course, the answer in many cases is people are concerned that Donald Trump will end their political lives, that he will primary them and they will lose. And of course, they point to the Liz Cheney situation, where she actually demonstrated some principle and voted to impeach Donald Trump, talked about his lack, in her view, of patriotism and the danger that he represented to democracy. And Liz Cheney at one point was the number 3 Republican in the House of Representatives, the daughter of Vice President Dick Cheney, and it didn't matter because she spoke out against him. Donald Trump targeted her electorally, primaried her, and she lost. And the same thing happened to Adam Kinzinger, of course, particularly when those two decided to participate in the January 6th commission, which exposed a lot of what took place in that violent assault on the Capitol. So I think many of them are in fear of their political lives, and that's been part of the challenge. But we continue to say to them, you were elected to defend your constituents, to stand up for your constituents, and there's life after Congress. And you should be willing to actually want to be able to look back on your time in the House of Representatives, knowing that you can keep your head held high because you did the right thing. Donald Trump is gone in 3.5 years, but their legacy or their failure to stand up to the extremism and the unprecedented assault on America as we know it will be with them forever, unless just a handful of Republicans, all we need is 4 on the House side or 4 on the Senate side to do the right thing. There are 220 Republicans in the House. We just need 4. That's less than 2%. And if less than 2% of the Republicans in the House actually decide to do the right thing, we can stop a lot of the foolishness, the malignant foolishness from taking place. And so over these next 18 months, we just continue to work on that every day, every week, every month, privately, publicly, with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to have any sympathy for them when they feel that way, because I'm like, well, what are you elected for? You were elected to actually be a public servant, and this is part of the responsibility. I want to pivot quickly to an issue that became a very big issue for Democrats in this last election, that Donald Trump has continued and the Republican Party has continued to use and weaponize against the Democratic Party, and that is trans athletes in sports. And let's be real specific, trans women in sports. You saw the ads that, one campaign of Kamala Harris is for they, them, not you. And what was never said, and I never saw any Democrats in a very, sort of a very bold or a very aggressive way, is say that policy where prisoners are able to get gender affirming care existed under Donald Trump the first time. It's been existing for quite a long time. It's a court order. So legally you are following the law by allowing gender affirming care. And they use that ad. And, another case in California where there's a trans woman competing in volleyball. Nevertheless, it feels as if rather than address this issue, that Democrats have chosen to shrink from it. given everything that has happened, and even though what you had the NCAA president Charlie Baker, he was on the Hill. He testified there are 500,000 college athletes, 10 are trans, and he didn't say women or men. Nevertheless, this issue has become one for your party that it doesn't seem that has been addressed. How do you plan to strategize against these attacks using a very vulnerable group of people in a way where you don't abandon them, or and they still feel like there is room under your tent for them, but also in a way that the American public can get behind?
Yeah, well, the bullying of trans kids is unacceptable, and Republicans, of course, have tried to weaponize this issue in many ways, as you've laid out. One of the first pieces of legislation that Republicans brought earlier this year in the new term was to try to jam Democrats up as it relates to trans women in sports and what they were seeking to do, and the way they framed it was a nationwide ban. And I think our explanation, we voted against the Republican bill in overwhelming numbers. And we were very clear that their effort actually was going to unleash bad behavior on girls in sports all across America. In fact, we framed their bill the Child Predator Empowerment Act, because they were calling for inspections of genitalia in a circumstance where we know abuses have taken place. Abuses have taken place in football. Abuses have taken place in gymnastics. Abuses have taken place in wrestling. And instead of responsibly trying to deal with the issues of competition in sports and how do we work through that in a community-based way that, of course, promotes the values of fairness, competitiveness, and participation, they want to just weaponize the issue politically. And so legislatively, they tried to jam us up, and we didn't run away from the issue. We exposed, their hypocrisy, and they're politicizing the issue in ways that would actually hurt the young girls that they were purporting to want to help. Now, I think my view, at least, is that these issues should be resolved locally, at the local level, with maximum parental involvement and maximum community involvement. And I think when it comes to what happened on the campaign trail, you're absolutely right in terms of the policy that was used against Vice President Harris was a policy that had also been carried out by Donald Trump and the Trump Justice Department, connection with the court order. And I think that if the campaign had it to do over again, I presume, given the outcome, there would have been a more forceful response to that ad and the weaponization of the issue against Kamala Harris. I can tell you that moving forward, we will never allow Republicans to mischaracterize our views on the issue, and we will never allow them to run ads against our candidates that aren't forcefully responded to immediately and often.
Before I get to the biggie question, and then we can wrap up the pod, I do have a question for you about Joe Biden. Obviously, there's a book out now, Jake Tapper, Original Sin, that essentially accuses the Democratic Party and those close to Joe Biden of covering up his declining mental health. And as somebody who was in close contact with Joe Biden quite a bit, what is your perspective, or what are your thoughts about how this narrative has now played out? Did you see anything? Were you aware of any kind of mental decline? What was your view as someone who had to work closely with the president?
Yeah, listen, I think it was very interesting because just a few months before that debate, Joe Biden had come to Capitol Hill in the most significant high-profile appearance of his presidency, which is to deliver the joint address to Congress. So in that instance, it was actually a State of the Union, speaking to tens of millions of Americans. And as you may recall, he came out like Smoking Joe Frazier and was getting at Republicans who in real time, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and others were trying to distract him and throw him off his game in what was a hostile work environment. Now, at the same period of time, it's clear that Joe Biden, who did acknowledge this, was slowing down as he was getting older. And he made the right decision in terms of not seeking re-election.
But did he make it at the right time?
Well, it came late, and Vice President Harris only had 107 days, and that clearly was a challenge. And so my view is the best thing we can do at this moment, as opposed to looking backward, is to look forward and create a situation where something like that never happens again, where we have an opportunity to make sure that decisions are made about whether someone's going to run or not, that we have next generation Democrats, which I believe will be the case in the context of both the candidates that we field to take back the House in 2026, but perhaps most importantly, I think a competitive field of candidates who are going to step forward in January or the early part of 2027 to raise their hand and run for president. And there'll be governors and there'll be senators and maybe some members of the House of Representatives and maybe former cabinet secretaries. But I believe each and every one of them are going to be next generation Democrats, the type of candidate that can potentially emerge from a field of great candidates and then excite the country in the way that Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or even Jimmy Carter in the 1976 election, or certainly John F. Kennedy when he ran in 1960, excited the country.
All right, we've reached the last question of the podcast, and I call it the messy question. This is where we make all the blogs and all the headlines, Representative Jeffries. As many people know who know you and are familiar, especially with your work when you're on the House floor, you are a unabashed, notorious Big fan. Biggie's your guy. So how should Jay-Z feel about the fact that you call Biggie the king of New York?
Well, listen, I mean, I think Jay-Z throughout his career has always paid the greatest degree of respect to the notorious B.I.G. He, of course, had the title, meaning Biggie, the king of New York, as he emerged in 1994 and then in the few years thereafter. And part of the reason why he got that title is, remember, right, you had Run DMC and LL Cool J, and then KRS-One and Rakim and Big Daddy Kane and Public Enemy, and like New York hip hop was killing it in the 1980s. And then, you know, toward the end of the 1980s, of course, you had NWA emerge, and Straight Outta Compton was a big hit. But then Ice Cube emerges when he breaks from NWA. And then Dr. Dre and Snoop and Death Row drop The Chronic. And that's one of the greatest records of all time. And gangster rap was emerging in a way that was capturing large parts of the country. And so the question was, you know, is the East Coast ever going to be able to come back, right, from being knocked down by the rise of Dr. Dre and Snoop, Ice Cube, right? And all these artists are on fire, the Dog Pound. And a lot of people credit Biggie Smalls, Ready to Die, 1994, though you also have to give credit to Wu-Tang. You have to give credit to Nas when he dropped Illmatic, the Fugees, and others. There was a new generation of hip hop artists that was emerging, in '93, but that really culminated with Ready to Die in September of '94, and then of course Biggie just capturing the country by storm, King of New York. But I think he's given that title in part because a lot of people view him, amongst others, but first amongst equals, in bringing the East back. And I think even Jay-Z would acknowledge that. Now, we never got to see what Biggie would become in terms of his body of work. We did get to see what Jay-Z would become, and it's been amazing. Both his legendary hip-hop career and then, of course, his legendary career as an entrepreneur. I'm not a businessman. I'm a business man. Let me go handle my business. Damn. I mean, Jay-Z said it. He forecasted it. And then he went out and did it. Right? So you gotta respect that.
So that answer alone, I see why you're in politics. Well done, Representative Jeffries. Well done. Well, listen. I know right now this is a very perilous time in this country, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of frustration, as you know, as you have heard, I'm sure, from your constituents, from Democrats, just nationally, what that is. But I am super curious as to how, moving forward, this party is able to pick itself off the ground after obviously going through a very, very tough period. So we will see. I am fond of calling this Trump administration the "Who Gonna Check Me Boo" administration, because right now they just out here doing stuff. So we will see what comes of it. But I want to thank you for giving me your time, and more importantly, for continuing to communicate messages that you feel like will be helpful to the American people. And good luck.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you. They're definitely wilding out in terms of the Trump administration. But we're going to end this national nightmare. It's going to happen. Part of it will involve us taking back control of the House. But then we, of course, have to finish the job, and we'll get past this and bring about a brighter day in the United States of America.